The origin of light and power. In the beginning, there was no stage, no theater, no audience. There was only eternity, and in the heart of eternity, there was God. Out of his will, order emerged from the chaos, and creation unfolded like a symphony. Stars ignited, galaxies spun, and the universe became a canvas of unfathomable beauty. But beyond the physical cosmos, there was another realm, heaven itself, the dwelling place of glory. It was here that the first beings of pure spirit were called into existence, the angels. They were not born of flesh or bound by time, but fashioned from light and fire, each one carrying the mark of divine artistry. Their purpose was simple, yet profound: to serve, to protect, and to sing the endless song of the Creator's greatness. In their voices, the heavens resounded with harmony, a chorus that never ceased. Among these countless hosts, one stood above the rest in brilliance. His name was Lucifer, meaning the morning star, the bearer of light. His form was dazzling, clothed in radiance that seemed to capture the very essence of dawn. The prophet Ezekiel would later describe him in words that trembled with awe. "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Every precious stone adorned you. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you." Lucifer was not merely one angel among many. He held authority, commanding choirs of worship, directing the currents of heaven's praise toward the throne of God. If heaven were a kingdom of order, then Lucifer was its crown jewel, majestic, untouchable, admired by multitudes. In his presence, others could not help but be struck by wonder, and yet this splendor was not his own. It was a reflection of the one who had crafted him. Like the moon borrowing light from the sun, Lucifer's brilliance was meant to point beyond himself, to the infinite glory of the Creator. For a time it did. Heaven was united, radiant, at peace. But perfection, as it turned out, was fragile. Even within the halls of light, a shadow began to stir. No one could see it at first. It was silent, almost invisible, like a whisper carried on the wind. Yet it grew, hidden in the secret chambers of the heart of the most beautiful of angels. A tension was forming, a fault line beneath the very foundation of paradise. The story of Lucifer's fall does not begin with thunder or war. It begins with admiration. The admiration he received, the admiration he gave himself. It begins with the slow realization that he was different, greater, more radiant than all the rest. Was it possible, he wondered, that such glory was not meant only for God's throne? The seeds of rebellion are never born in an instant. They are cultivated over time, watered by pride, fed by discontent, hidden under layers of outward obedience. To the other angels, Lucifer was still flawless, still the blazing morning star. To God alone, the faint cracks in his loyalty were visible. And in those cracks, history itself would split open. Lucifer, the keeper of the flame. Before the fracture became visible, Lucifer was the very embodiment of glory. His position was unmatched. The prophets describe him not merely as beautiful, but as adorned with every precious stone, reflecting colors like a living jewel. He was appointed as a guardian cherub, one who walked in the midst of the blazing stones, standing near the very throne of God himself. Few could imagine a closer intimacy with the Almighty. He was not a soldier like Michael, nor a messenger like Gabriel. His realm was worship, music, and majesty. Imagine the sound of countless voices raised in unison, rivers of praise flowing upward like fire and light. At the center of that symphony stood Lucifer. His voice was like thunder wrapped in silk, drawing the hosts of heaven into harmony. When he lifted his wings, whole choirs responded. When he sang, galaxies seemed to vibrate with the resonance. To the angels, he was the keeper of the flame, the one who gathered their adoration and carried it like incense to the throne. His role was not only sacred, it was dangerous. For in holding the flame of worship, one must never confuse the fire with oneself. The flame belongs to God alone, but there was something intoxicating about it. Imagine billions of eyes turning toward you in awe. Imagine feeling the vibrations of glory coursing through you each time you lifted your voice. Lucifer stood so close to the fountain of power that over time, he began to believe the water was his. He began to see himself not as a servant, but as a rightful heir. The prophet Isaiah preserves fragments of his inner thoughts. I will ascend to the heavens. I'll raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High. These were not words spoken aloud, at least, not at first. They were seeds, sown deep within the soil of ambition, seeds that, given time, would sprout into something darker than heaven had ever known. At this point, the rebellion had not yet erupted. The music still played, the choirs still sang, the light still shimmered across Lucifer's form. To the watching hosts, nothing has changed. He was still the morning star, radiant and flawless. But within, something irreversible had begun. And as the flame of worship passed through his hands, Lucifer began to wonder, what if one day the flame did not rise upward? What if it stopped with him? Thought, so small and quiet, was the first crack in eternity's harmony. No one saw it. No one felt it. But heaven's perfect order had just been shaken by an imperceptible tremor. The morning star, keeper of the flame, was beginning to believe the flame was his to keep. The silent rebellion rarely begins with a shout. More often, it begins with a whisper. For Lucifer, the whisper was his own reflection. Every time he looked upon his radiance, every time he heard the thunder of voices following his lead, he felt the whisper grow louder. Why not more? Why should all this glory pass through me, only to rise to another? The scriptures hint at his descent. Prophet Ezekiel writes, "Your heart became proud on account of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor." Isaiah echoes it. You said in your heart, I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, will make myself like the Most High. These were not accusations hurled after the fall. They were insights into the slow corruption that had already taken root. Lucifer did not rush into open defiance. Instead, he began to speak softly, carefully to those nearest to him. He asked questions more than he gave commands. Have you ever wondered, he might whisper to another angel, why one throne sits so high while we, radiant beings of power and wisdom, bow forever? His voice was like honey, his arguments subtle. It was not rebellion he offered, at least not yet. It was curiosity, framed as enlightenment. Some angels turned away, unsettled. Others lingered. The more they listened, the more they began to sense the stirring of something new. Freedom, autonomy, equality with the throne itself. Lucifer knew exactly how to dress his poison. He cloaked pride in reason, ambition in justice, defiance in beauty. And slowly, quietly, he began to gather followers. No one knows how long this went on. In the eternal halls of heaven, time does not pass as it does on earth. But what is clear is that Lucifer succeeded in convincing not a handful, not a minor circle, but a full 1/3 of the heavenly host. Imagine that, a multitude beyond human comprehension. Radiant beings who had stood in the presence of God, now persuaded to turn their loyalty toward the morning star. Yet even as the movement swelled, Lucifer remained outwardly obedient. He still lifted his voice in worship. He still carried the flame toward the throne. But in his heart, he had already turned. And with him, countless others had shifted their gaze, no longer fixed on God, but on the one who dared to imagine himself his equal. The rebellion was still silent, but the silence was pregnant with violence. The tension in heaven grew, invisible yet undeniable. For the first time in eternity, heaven was no longer united. And in that fragile silence, a line was about to be drawn, a line that could never be erased. Michael, commander of heaven's armies. While Lucifer was weaving his web of pride and persuasion, another figure stood in sharp contrast. His name was Michael. Unlike Lucifer, he was not described in Scripture for dazzling beauty or musical brilliance. His greatness was not in charm or radiance, but in loyalty. If Lucifer was the morning star, radiant and admired, Michael was the unshakable mountain, steadfast, immovable. Michael's very name carried a challenge. Who is like God? It was less a question and more a declaration, a banner raised against any who might exalt themselves. Where Lucifer said in his heart, "I will ascend," Michael's name answered back, "None can ascend, none are like the Most High." The prophets and seers give us glimpses of his role. In the book of Daniel, Michael is described as the great prince who protects your people. He appears as a warrior, a defender, a general of heaven's armies. When he stands, he does not stand alone. Hosts of angels rally at his command, their allegiance not to his charisma, but to the throne he serves without question. Unlike Lucifer, Michael did not shine for himself. His power was not borrowed for pride, but yielded for obedience. He did not seek worship, nor did he command it. His authority came from humility, from a singular devotion to the will of God, that made him not weaker than Lucifer, but infinitely stronger. For while Lucifer's strength was built on self-exaltation, Michael's was anchored in something unshakable, the eternal authority of the Creator. As whispers of rebellion grew louder, Michael was not deceived. He saw what others could not. Perhaps he had no rival's charm to sway hearts, but he had clarity, and clarity in heaven is a weapon. The contrast could not have been greater. One angel dazzled the heavens with borrowed light, plotting to seize the throne. The other, plain in comparison, carried a sword of loyalty that would not bend. One desired power, the other stood as its guardian. Lucifer's path was ambition, Michael's path was obedience. And soon, those paths would collide with a force that would shake heaven itself. The war in heaven. The silence could not last forever. Pride does not remain hidden. Rebellion cannot remain whispered. What began as questions in secret halls now swelled into open defiance. Once a symphony of perfect harmony was suddenly pierced by a discordant note, the morning star declaring himself more than servant, claiming the right to ascend. The book of Revelation gives us only a few lines. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. Just a handful of words, yet behind them lies a battle unlike anything the cosmos has ever witnessed. It was not war as mortals understand it. There were no iron swords, no clashing shields. This was a conflict of spirit, of authority, of loyalty. Yet to the eye, it may have blazed like fire. Angels, radiant as lightning, became warriors. Their voices, once joined in worship, now clashed in cries of defiance and war songs of allegiance. The very heavens shook with the violence of their struggle. On one side, Lucifer the morning star, now revealed as the dragon, leading a third of the host. His beauty twisted into fury, his voice no longer song but roar. Around him gathered those who had believed his promises of freedom, those intoxicated by his vision of power. Their wings darkened, their light dimmed, but their will burned with rebellion. On the other side stood Michael. He did not fight for glory, nor for himself. He fought for the throne, for the order that Lucifer had dared to shatter. Behind him, 2/3 of heaven's army stood resolute, their swords like flame, their eyes fixed not on Michael, but on the one who sat upon the throne. The clash was inevitable. Imagine the cosmos trembling as beings of pure power collided, light against light, will against will. Stars themselves seemed to flicker as heaven became a battlefield. The sound was not merely heard. It resounded through existence, echoing across creation. Lucifer struck with rage, his voice promising thrones, crowns, dominion. Michael answered with a single defiance embodied in his very name. Who is like God? With every clash, the question cut deeper, stripping away the illusion of Lucifer's strength. The battle was long, fierce, but in the end, it could only end one way. For no matter how radiant, no matter how persuasive, a creature cannot overthrow the Creator. Lucifer fought with borrowed glory. Michael fought with the authority of the eternal. The difference was absolute. And then it happened, the moment of final defeat. The dragon and his angels could no longer hold their place. Heaven itself rejected them. Like lightning torn from the sky, they were hurled down, cast from the heights into the depths. The morning star fell, and with him fell a multitude. The war was over, heaven was cleansed, but the story was not finished. For the defeated did not vanish. They had lost their place above, but they still had a stage below. And so was a single fall. The battlefield shifted from heaven to earth. The fall of the morning star. There is a silence that follows war, a silence more terrible than the battle itself. When Lucifer fell, the heavens did not celebrate. There was no triumphal chorus, no songs of victory. Instead, there was grief. For what had been lost was not merely an enemy defeated, it was a brother, once radiant, once beloved, now exiled forever. The prophets strain for words to describe it. Isaiah writes, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations." Ezekiel adds, "Your heart became proud. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings." What had been the crown of heaven became a byword, a warning etched into eternity. That pride corrupts, and even the brightest star can collapse into darkness. Lucifer was no longer the bearer of light. Stripped of glory, stripped of place, he became Satan the adversary. The brilliance that once dazzled now burned with fury. His wings, once gleaming, bore the ash of rebellion. His voice, once leading the choirs of heaven, now seethed with hatred for the throne he could never touch again. But do not mistake his fall for annihilation. He was cast down, yes, but not destroyed. Power remained, twisted though it was. Cunning remained, sharpened by bitterness. And worst of all, desire remained, the insatiable hunger to defy God, not from above, but from below. He did not fall alone. With him descended a third of the host. Angels turned into demons, their allegiance sealed in rebellion. What once was harmony now became legion. The cosmos, once whole, was now divided. And where did they fall? Onto the very stage God was preparing for something new earth. The war in heaven was finished, but its shadow now loomed over creation itself. Satan, banished from the heights, turned his gaze downward. If he could not ascend to God's throne, he would seek dominion elsewhere. If he could not wound the Almighty in heaven, he would strike at what God loved most on earth. The fall of the morning star was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a darker one. For the adversary had found a new battlefield, and humanity itself was about to become his target. The aftershock on earth. When the morning star fell, creation trembled. Heaven had been cleansed, but the battlefield had shifted. No longer could Lucifer wage war among the angels. Now his eyes turned toward the earth, the masterpiece of God's design. The place where dust was shaped into life, and where the breath of the Creator filled clay with a living soul. The Garden of Eden was not merely a paradise of rivers and trees. It was a sanctuary, a reflection of heaven itself, a place where God walked with man in the cool of the day. Here Adam and Eve bore the image of the Creator, innocent, uncorrupted, destined to steward creation in harmony with the one who had made them. They were fragile compared to angels, yet endowed with something extraordinary, the power of choice. For Satan, this was opportunity. If he could not topple the throne, he could corrupt its image. If he could not reign in heaven, he could infect the earth. And so, the fallen morning star entered the garden not with an army, but with a whisper, just as he had begun in heaven. He came in the form of a serpent, subtle and cunning. His voice was velvet over steel, familiar in its pattern. As he had once asked angels, "Why bow forever?" So he now asked the woman, "Did God really say?" The strategy had not changed. So doubt, feed, pride, cloak rebellion in the guise of enlightenment. Eve listened. She gazed upon the fruit, saw that it was pleasing, desirable for gaining wisdom. And in that moment, the same seed that had corrupted Lucifer found soil in the heart of humanity. Pride, independence, the desire to be like God. And she ate, and she gave to Adam, and he ate. And with that, paradise was ruptured. The earth groaned under the weight of disobedience. harmony shattered, innocence fled. The adversary had struck, and the sound would echo through generations. Yet even here, in the first tragedy of mankind, there was a promise. God declared that the serpent would not have the final word. A seed would come from the woman, a deliverer, who would crush the serpent's head, though his own heel would be struck. The prophecy was spoken, a thread of hope woven into the tapestry of despair. For now, however, the aftershock of heaven's war was clear. Humanity had joined the battlefield. No longer was the conflict between Michael and Lucifer alone. Every man, every woman, every child born into the world would carry the weight of this cosmic struggle. The garden closed. The sword of flame barred the way back, and the adversary, victorious in his deception, prepared for a war that would span the ages. Michael, in his future confrontations, the war in heaven had cast its shadow over earth. But Michael, the great commander, did not fade into silence. Again and again, he appeared in the unfolding story of humanity, not as a distant symbol, but as a living defender. If Satan sought to corrupt and destroy, Michael's task was to guard and protect. The prophet Daniel records some of the earliest glimpses of Michael's mission. In visions of empires rising and falling, of kings and wars, Daniel was told of a heavenly struggle that mirrored the battles on earth. Angelic messengers spoke of being delayed by the Prince of Persia, a dark spiritual power resisting God's purposes. And it was Michael, one of the chief princes, who came to aid them. Later, Daniel is assured, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. Michael's very identity is tied to protection. He is not only a warrior, he is a guardian. Centuries later, the New Testament preserves another moment of confrontation. In the letter of Jude, we glimpse Michael disputing with Satan over the body of Moses. The details are sparse, mysterious, but they reveal something essential. Michael did not fight with arrogance or insults. He simply declared, "The Lord rebuke you." His strength did not rest in himself, but in the authority of the one he served. And of course, Revelation had already shown him in his most decisive role, the commander who drove the dragon from heaven. But that was not a single event of the past. It was a pattern, an enduring truth. Wherever the adversary rose, Michael stood in opposition. His name, his calling, his very existence answered Lucifer's pride with the eternal challenge. Who is like God? What makes Michael compelling is not that he is more powerful than Satan and himself. The angels, for all their might, are still creatures. What makes him formidable is his unwavering alignment with God's will. He does not waver, does not compromise, does not seek his own glory. Where Lucifer turned inward, Michael turned upward. That distinction made all the difference. To the people of God through the ages, Michael's presence became a reminder. The battle is not only theirs to fight. There is help unseen, guardianship beyond the veil. Even as Satan prowls, Michael stands as a sign that heaven has not abandoned earth. But even Michael's vigilance could not end the story. For though he fought, defended, rebuked, the adversary still roamed, still deceived, still sought to devour. Michael could hold the line, but he could not deliver the final blow. That would require another one greater than Michael, greater than all the hosts of heaven. The war was not finished. The greatest battle was still to come. The promise of final victory. Though the dragon was cast down, though Eden was lost, the story never ended in despair. From the beginning, a thread of promise ran through the darkness. The serpent would not reign forever. Its victories, sharp though they were, would only be temporary. Its power, vast though it seemed, was already marked with an expiration date. The scriptures speak with one voice about the end. In the visions of Daniel, Michael arises in the last days to defend God's people during a time of unparalleled distress. The book of Revelation paints the final picture. The dragon, the ancient serpent, bound and thrown into the abyss. His armies defeated. His rebellion crushed beyond repair. The war that began in heaven will conclude not with compromise, but with annihilation. At the center of this promise is not Michael, nor any host of angels. It is Christ, the seed promised in Eden, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Where Adam failed, Christ triumphed. Where Satan whispered lies, Christ spoke truth. Where death claimed dominion, Christ shattered its hold. On the cross, the war took its most decisive turn. It did not look like victory, blood, nails, a broken body, yet in that seeming defeat, the serpent's head was struck. Paul would later write, having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. The adversary's accusations, once hurled against humanity, were silenced by the blood that paid every debt. And yet, though the victory is won, the battle lingers. The dragon rages, knowing his time is short. His fury still lashes the earth. His lies still ensnare hearts. His shadow still haunts nations. But he does so as one already condemned, a prisoner awaiting sentence. Here lies the hope that sustained saints through ages of trial. The end is written. Christ will return, and with him final judgment. Michael will once more take the field, not as a solitary defender, but as the general of heaven's host. Marching in the wake of the King of Kings, together they will cast down the adversary once and for all. No more whispers, no more shadows, no more serpent's venom. The promise of final victory is not distant fantasy, it is certainty. It is the assurance that pride will not endure, that rebellion will not last. The morning star's fall was only the beginning of his end. I want to force those who live in the tension of this war. The promise is simple, but profound. Light has already triumphed. The darkness fights on borrowed time. The legacy of the war in heaven? The war in heaven is not just an ancient tale, nor a distant prophecy. It is a mirror held before the human soul. For what was true of Lucifer is true of us all. Pride whispers, ambition tempts, and the desire to be our own master gnaws quietly at the heart. The cosmic battle between Michael and the morning star is echoed in every choice between humility and arrogance, between obedience and rebellion, between light and shadow. Lucifer's story is more than a cautionary tale, it is a warning etched into eternity. The brightest among angels fell, not because he lacked beauty, but because he loved it too much. He mistook borrowed light for his own. How many of us have done the same? How often do we build our lives on gifts that were never ours to claim, forgetting the giver who placed them in our hands? In Michael, his legacy is equally clear. He does not dazzle. He does not draw attention. He does not sing of his own greatness, yet he stands, unyielding, loyal, victorious not by force of personality, but by force of devotion. His cry, "Who is like God?" still resounds, not only across heaven, but in the heart of those who choose faithfulness over pride. The war in heaven continues, but its battlefield has shifted. It rages in the unseen realms of spirit, in the struggles of nations, in the secret corners of the human heart. Each act of defiance against the darkness, each prayer whispered in faith, each choice of humility over self-exaltation is another echo of Michael's stand. One day, the conflict will end. The serpent will fall silent. The adversary will be no more. Heaven and earth will be made new, and the harmony once shattered will be restored. Until then, we live in the in-between, soldiers on a battlefield older than time itself. The legacy of the war in heaven is this: every life matters in the struggle. Every choice leans toward light or toward shadow. And though the dragon still roars, his defeat is assured. For the throne remains unshaken, and the cry still resounds, "Who is like God?" The answer is eternal: none. And that truth is the victory that can never be undone.